You feel it before you see it. The sudden isolation, the friends who turn into strangers overnight, the chaos that hits exactly when you decide to get closer to God. You aren't crazy, and you aren't unlucky. You are under siege. These are the specific, calculated attacks on the chosen woman. Leora stood on the balcony of the Oak Haven estate, the wind whipping her hair across her face. Below her, the sprawling garden was a mess of overgrown thorns and broken statuary, much like her life had been 5 years ago. Now, at 34, she was the owner of Restored Glory, the city's most sought-after architectural restoration firm. She had prayed for this. She had fasted for this. But as she looked out over her empire, a familiar, hollow ache settled in her chest. The silence was deafening. This was the first attack, though Leora didn't recognize it as warfare yet. It was the attack of solitude. The higher she climbed in her calling, the smaller her circle became. Phone calls stopped coming. Dinner invitations dried up. It wasn't that she was unlikable. It was that her presence agitated the demons in others. The light in her exposed the shadows in them, and so they withdrew. "Lord," she whispered, gripping the cold iron railing, "I asked for a territory, not a prison. Why am I so alone?" Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Thinking of you. Can I bring dinner by the site?" Leora smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing. Daniel was new. He had walked into a church 3 months ago, handsome, charismatic, and seemingly devout. He quoted scripture, he understood her drive, and he claimed God had told him to cover her. He arrived 40 minutes later with Italian takeout and a warm smile. They sat on the floor of the unfinished ballroom. "You're working too hard, Leora," Daniel said, pouring sparkling water into plastic cups. "You need to let someone else carry the load. You're too delicate for all this construction dust." "I love the dust," Leora countered, though his concern felt nice. "It's part of the refining process." "I know." Daniel reached out, brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was electric, but, and this was the thing she ignored, her stomach tightened. Not with butterflies, but with a warning, a check in her spirit. "But you need a partner, someone to manage the finances, the contracts. You're a creative, Leora. You shouldn't be bogged down by the boring stuff." This was the second attack, the counterfeit connection. The enemy knows that if he cannot destroy you with enemies, he will destroy you with the wrong friends. He sends distractions, packaged as blessings. Daniel wasn't overtly evil. He was subtle. Over the next few weeks, the dynamic shifted. Daniel didn't just want to help. He wanted to steer. He began attending meetings with her. "I'm just observing," he'd say. But soon he was interjecting. "Actually, Leora isn't sure about that timeline," he told a contractor one afternoon, cutting her off. Leora blinked, surprised. "No, the timeline is fine, Mike. Ignore that." Later in the car, Daniel sulked. "I was just trying to protect you. You let people walk all over you. You need a man's voice in the room." Leora felt a flash of guilt. Was she being ungrateful? He was only trying to help. She apologized. She let him into the inner circle of her business. She let him see the books. She ignored the way her prayer life had dwindled since he arrived. She ignored the fact that she spent more time managing Daniel's emotions than seeking God's face. The drain was slow. It was spiritual anemia. She was tired all the time. Her dreams, usually vivid and prophetic, turned dark and confused. She stopped waking up at 5 a.m. to pray. One evening, her grandmother, a woman of iron faith named Ruth, came to visit the site. Ruth walked through the halls, her cane tapping against the hardwood. She stopped abruptly at the office door where Daniel was sitting at Leora's desk, on the phone. Ruth didn't smile. She turned to Leora, her eyes sharp. "Who is the gatekeeper here, Leora?" "What do you mean, Anna? That's just Daniel." "I didn't ask his name," Ruth said, her voice low and dangerous. "I asked who gave him the keys. There is a fox in your vineyard, child. and he is eating the grapes before they can bloom. He's a Christian, Nana. He helps me. He speaks the language of Canaan, but he has the accent of Egypt, Ruth warned. You are a woman of destiny. The devil doesn't send a red monster with a pitchfork to women like you. He sends a knight in shining armor who never takes off his helmet because he doesn't want you to see his eyes. Wake up. Leora brushed it off. She was in love, or at least she was in love with not being lonely. 2 days later, the Oak Haven project hit a wall. The bank called. There was a discrepancy in the loan application. A document had been filed incorrectly, a document Daniel had offered to handle. When she confronted him, he exploded. I was trying to fix your mess, he shouted, his face twisting into something unrecognizable. You're so controlling. No wonder you're alone. No wonder no one stays. The words pierced her like a lance. Rejection, the core wound. He stormed out, leaving her trembling in the empty ballroom. But as the door slammed, the silence returned. And for the first time in months, the air felt clear. The heaviness lifted. She fell to her knees, weeping, not for Daniel, but for herself. She had traded her discernment for companionship. She had allowed a counterfeit to occupy the space reserved for a kingdom connection. God spoke to her spirit then, clear as a bell. I removed the hedge so you would see the wolf. Now lock the gate. But as Leora wiped her eyes, she didn't realize that the counterfeit was only the distraction. While she was busy managing Daniel's drama, the real enemy had been working in the shadows, closer than she could ever imagine. If Daniel was the distraction, Lydia was the foundation. Lydia was Leora's chief operations officer and her best friend of 10 years. They had started Restored Glory together in a garage. Lydia was the godmother to Leora's niece. They had vacationed together, cried together, and warred in prayer together. Lydia was safe. Or so Leora thought. This was the third and most painful attack, the Judas betrayal. It is a spiritual law that the level of your betrayal reveals the level of your future promotion. Jesus had to be kissed by Judas to reach the cross and the resurrection. David had to be hunted by Saul to reach the throne. The week after Daniel left, Leora threw herself back into work. The Oak Haven deadline was looming. She needed everything to be perfect. She relied heavily on Lydia to manage the contractors and the budget. You look exhausted, Lydia said one morning, handing Leora a coffee. Lydia looked impeccable. Sharp blazer, perfect hair, a sympathetic smile. Why don't you take the weekend off? Go to the lake house. I'll handle the inspection with the investors. I can't, Leora sighed. The investors need to see me. I'm the face of the brand. A flicker passed through Lydia's eyes. It was so quick Leora almost missed it. A micro-expression of contempt? Envy? Of course, Lydia said, her voice sweet. You're the star. I'm just the mechanics. Lydia, you know that's not true, Leora said, reaching for her hand. I couldn't do this without you. Lydia pulled her hand away, pretending to check her watch. We're late. The attack began with whispers. This is character assassination. Leora started noticing strange looks from her vendors. The plumber, who she had known for years, wouldn't look her in the eye. The pastor of her church, usually warm, gave her a curt nod and kept walking. Then came the email. It was from the lead investor of the Oak Haven project. Dear Leora, in light of the recent allegations regarding the misuse of funds and the ethical concerns raised about your personal conduct, we are pausing the release of the final capital tranche pending an audit. Leora's blood ran cold. Misuse of funds? Ethical concerns? She stormed into Lydia's office. Did you see this? Who is spreading these lies? Lydia looked up from her computer, her face pale. I tried to stop them, Leora. I told them it wasn't true. Told who? What are you talking about? There are rumors, Lydia said, her voice shaking. People are saying you've been funneling money into a personal account, that Daniel was actually a cover for laundering, and Lydia paused, looking down. They're saying you're unstable, that the visions and prophecies you talk about are just mental instability. Leora felt like she had been punched in the gut. But you know the books are clean. You manage them, and you know my walk with God." "I know," Lydia said, squeezing a stress ball. "But, Leora, maybe you have been too stressed lately. Maybe you made a mistake and didn't realize it." The gaslighting was subtle. Lydia wasn't defending her. She was planting doubt. Leora spent the next 3 days in a frenzy, pulling bank records, printing emails. But every time she tried to find a file, it was missing, deleted from the server. The realization hit her at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. She was looking at the digital logs of the server. The files hadn't been deleted by a hacker. They had been deleted by user ID L_admin. "Lydia." Leora sat back in her chair, the room spinning. It wasn't just the files, the whispers, the investors knowing about Daniel. The only person Leora had confided in about the depth of her trouble with Daniel was Lydia. Lydia hadn't been defending her. Lydia had been the source. Why? Leora drove to the office, intending to confront her. It was early, the sun just rising. She saw Lydia's car in the lot. She walked quietly to the back entrance. As she approached the conference room, she heard voices. Lydia was on speakerphone. "She's unraveling. Just like I said." Lydia's voice was crisp, professional, and utterly cold. "The investors are pulling out. Once the stock drops, I can bring the new partners in. We can buy her out for pennies on the dollar. The brand is good. It just needs a new face. A stable face." "And Leora?" a male voice asked. "She'll go back to doing small renovations. It's where she belongs. She always thought she was so special with her calling. It's time she learned that business is reality, not a prayer meeting." Leora stood outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle. She wanted to burst in. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But the Holy Spirit fell on her, heavy and still. "Stand still," the voice whispered. "The battle is the Lord's. This is the hardest part for the chosen woman. When the Judas is revealed, the instinct is to war in the flesh, to expose them, to scream, 'I am innocent,' from the rooftops." Leora lowered her hand. She stepped back. She walked out of the building and into the cool morning air. She got into a car and drove not to a lawyer, but to the Oakhaven estate. She walked into the unfinished chapel she was building on the grounds. She lay face down on the concrete floor. "Lord," she sobbed, the betrayal tearing her apart. "My own friend, my sister. Why?" In the silence, she realized the truth. Lydia hadn't just attacked her business, she had attacked her identity. She always thought she was so special. This was the spirit of envy, the spirit of Cain toward Abel. Lydia couldn't stand the favor of God on Leora's life, so she sought to kill the dream. Leora lay there for hours. She had lost her boyfriend. She was losing her best friend. She might lose her business. But as she prayed, a strange strength began to rise in her, a heat in her belly. This was the anointing of the crushing. She stood up. She wasn't going to fight Lydia with words. She wasn't going to play Lydia's game. She was going to fight with the only weapon the enemy couldn't replicate: integrity. Leora drove to the bank. She met with the bank manager personally. "Audit everything," she said calmly. "Freeze my accounts. Bring in a forensic accountant. I have nothing to hide. Leora, if we do this, it will be public. It could ruin your reputation if they find anything," the manager warned. "They won't find anything," Leora said, her eyes blazing with a fire that hadn't been there the day before. "Because I walk in the light, and the darkness cannot comprehend it. Jan." She walked out, ready for war. But she didn't know that the enemy had one more card to play, an attack on her physical body that would bring her to her knees just as the truth was about to come out. The days following the initiation of the audit were not filled with the noise of battle, but with a terrifying, suffocating silence. This was the fourth attack, the spirit of infirmity and weariness. When the enemy realizes he cannot corrupt your character with a counterfeit, Daniel, and he cannot destroy your reputation with a Judas, Lydia, He shifts his target to the vessel itself. He attacks the body and the mind. He seeks to drain the physical strength you need to birth the promise. It started with a headache that wouldn't leave, a dull, throbbing pressure behind Leora's eyes that made reading the Bible painful. Then came the insomnia. Every time Leora closed her eyes, her mind would race with catastrophic scenarios. What if they find a mistake I made? What if I lose the house? What if I end up destitute? The fear was irrational, but it felt physical. It was a heavy blanket, damp and cold, wrapped around her chest. One Tuesday afternoon, Leora was driving to the pharmacy. Her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Her heart rate monitor watch beeped incessantly, 120 beats per minute, and she was sitting still at a red light. Suddenly the world tilted. Her vision tunneled. Her breath hitched in her throat, refusing to go down. She gasped, clawing at her seatbelt. I'm dying, she thought. This is it. My heart is giving out. She barely managed to pull into a gas station parking lot before blattering out. She woke up in a hospital room, the sterile beep of machines replacing the chaos in her head. A doctor, a kind man named Dr. Evans, stood over her with a clipboard. Leora, he said gently, we've run every test, EKG, MRI, blood work. Your heart is fine. There's no stroke. Physically, you are a healthy 34-year-old woman. Then why can't I breathe? She whispered, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. Why do I feel like I'm being crushed? Panic, he said. Extreme exhaustion and acute stress response. Your body has simply decided it has had enough. But as Leora lay there, staring at the white ceiling tiles, she knew Dr. Evans was only half right. It was stress, yes, but it was also spiritual. It was the spirit of Python, the spirit that squeezes the breath, the pneuma, the prayer life, out of the believer before they can reach their destiny. She was discharged 2 days later with a prescription for sedatives and orders to rest. But rest is impossible when your empire is burning. She returned to her apartment, which felt dark and oppressive. She didn't turn on the lights. She sat on her sofa, wrapped in a blanket, too weak to pray. This is the danger zone for the chosen woman. When you are too weak to fight, you are vulnerable to the fifth attack, the whisper of giving up. The phone rang. It was Lydia. Leora stared at the screen. Why was she calling? Leora answered, her voice raspy. I heard you were in the hospital. Lydia's voice came through, smooth as silk, feigning concern. Leora, look at yourself. This business is killing you. The investors are furious about the audit. They're saying you're unstable. Just resign. Sign over your shares to the holding company I set up. We'll give you a severance package. You can rest. You can finally rest. The offer hung in the air, tempting and poisonous. Just give up. It would be so easy. No more fighting, no more audits, no more enemies. I need to think, Leora stammered. Don't think, Lydia pressed, her tone hardening. Just sign. I'm sending the courier over now. Do it for your health, Leora. God doesn't want you to suffer like this, does he? Click. Leora dropped the phone. The room seemed to spin again. The courier was coming. The papers were coming. She was going to sign. She just wanted the pain to stop. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Leora dragged herself up. She felt like a ghost in her own life. She opened the door, expecting a courier. It wasn't a courier. It was Nana Ruth. The old woman stood there, looking smaller than usual, but her eyes were blazing with an ancient fire. She didn't ask how Leora was. She didn't offer soup. She walked past Leora into the living room, sensing the heavy, suffocating atmosphere. So, Ruth said, her voice cutting through the gloom, you are preparing to sell your birthright for a bowl of soup because you are tired? I'm not selling my birthright, Leora wept, collapsing onto the sofa. I'm dying, Nana. I can't do this anymore. Look at me. I have no strength left. Ruth walked over to the window and threw the curtains open. The afternoon sun blinded Leora, forcing her to squint. "Well, you are not dying," Ruth declared, stomping her cane on the floor. "You are in the wine press. There is a difference. To the grape, the pressing feels like death. It feels like crushing. It feels like the end. But to the winemaker, it is the beginning of the new wine." Ruth sat down next to her granddaughter and took her cold hands. "Leora, listen to me. The enemy attacks you with heaviness because he knows you are close to the breakthrough. The python squeezes the hardest right before the victim dies. But you are not a victim. You are chosen, and chosen women do not negotiate with terrorists." "Lydia is sending papers," Leora whispered. "Let her send them," Ruth said. "We will burn them." Ruth began to pray. It wasn't a quiet, polite prayer. It was a war cry. She prayed in the Spirit. She prayed the Psalms. She bound the spirit of infirmity and the spirit of fear. For an hour, the apartment felt like a battlefield. Slowly, the vice around Leora's chest began to loosen. The fog in her brain began to clear. The supernatural exhaustion that had pinned her down lifted, replaced by a spark of righteous anger. "Why should I quit?" Leora thought. "God gave me this vision. Not Lydia. Not the investors." When the courier actually arrived an hour later, Leora answered the door. She looked pale, but she was standing upright. "Sign here, please," the courier said, holding out a clipboard. Leora looked at the document. "Transfer of ownership, Restored Glory LLC." She took the pen. She looked at the signature line. Then she looked at the courier. "No," she said. "Ma'am?" "Tell Lydia," Leora said, her voice gaining strength with every word, "that if she wants my company, she will have to come and take it from my cold, dead hands. And tell her I'm feeling much better." She slammed the door. She turned to Nana Ruth, who was smiling for the first time in weeks. "Now," Leora said, a dangerous glint in her eye. "Get me my laptop. I have a meeting to prepare for." The boardroom at Restored Glory was glass-walled, overlooking the city skyline. It was designed to be impressive, but today it felt like an execution chamber. This was the setting for the sixth attack, which often disguises itself as the end, but is actually the setup, the public trial. Seated around the mahogany table were the three lead investors: Mr. Sterling, a man with a face like a bulldog; Mrs. Vance, a sharp-eyed venture capitalist; and a representative from the bank. And there was Lydia. She sat at the head of the table, Leora's seat, looking triumphant in a crimson suit. She didn't look at Leora as she entered. Leora walked in. She was thin, her clothes hanging slightly loose on her frame, but she walked with a cadence she hadn't possessed before. It was the walk of a woman who had faced death and decided to decline the offer. She was accompanied not by a lawyer, but by the forensic auditor she had hired, a quiet man named Mr. Clark. "Leora," Mr. Sterling grunted. "We didn't expect you. Lydia said you were incapacitated." "Lydia says a lot of things," Leora said calmly, pulling out the chair at the opposite end of the table. "I'm here to hear the results of the audit." Lydia scoffed, finally looking up. "Leora, please, don't embarrass yourself. We know about the mismanagement. We know about the donations to your church that look suspiciously like embezzlement. Just sign the papers and let us salvage what's left of the brand." "The audit, please," Leora said, nodding to Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark stood up. He adjusted his glasses and opened a thick folder. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored, which was terrifying. "I have completed a full forensic reconstruction of the last 24 months of Restored Glory's financials," Clark began, his voice dry. "I investigated the allegations of embezzlement against Miss Leora." The room went silent. Lydia smirked, tapping her pen. "I found no evidence of embezzlement by Miss Leora," Clark stated. Lydia's pen stopped tapping. "That's impossible. You didn't look hard enough." "However," Clark continued, ignoring her, "I did find a sophisticated network of shell vendors set up to siphon construction funds. These vendors billed for materials that were never delivered and labor that was never performed. The total amount stolen is approximately $1.2 million. Mr. Sterling slammed his hand on the table. I knew it. She's incompetent. The shell companies, Clark said, raising his voice slightly, were registered to an offshore holding company. He slid a piece of paper down the table. The sole beneficiary of that holding company is Lydia Moretti. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Lydia's face drained of color. That's a lie. He's lying. Leora paid him to say that. I have the bank transfers, Lydia, Clark said, sliding a stack of papers towards the investors. IP addresses, digital signatures. It's all here. But the twist that God had promised Leora in the secret place, wasn't done. Clark turned to Mr. Sterling. I also found something else. An email thread between you, Mr. Sterling, and Miss Moretti. Mr. Sterling froze. It appears, Clark read from a document, that the plan was to artificially devalue the company through these rumors and mismanagement so that you could trigger the buyout clause in the contract. You intended to buy Leora's shares for pennies, then resell the company to a larger developer for a 400% profit once Lydia was installed as CEO. This was the seventh and final attack, the conspiracy of the high places. It wasn't just a bad friend. It was a systemic attack. It was Goliath and the Philistines. The room erupted. Mrs. Vance turned on Mr. Sterling with fury. The bank representative began making frantic notes. Lydia sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, watching her future disintegrate. Leora sat perfectly still. She looked at Lydia. She remembered the Bible study they did together. She remembered the vacations. She remembered the betrayal. She felt a wave of nausea, but then it passed. In its place came a profound, terrifying peace. Gentlemen, Leora said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the arguing instantly. And Lydia, she stood up. You thought you were burying me, Leora said, her eyes scanning the room. But you didn't know you were planting me. You thought that by isolating me, slandering me, and stealing from me, you would break me. But you only stripped away everything that wasn't God. She looked at Mr. Sterling. I will not be selling my shares. In fact, given this evidence of fraud and conspiracy, I believe the buyout clause works in reverse. I will be accepting your resignations from the board, effective immediately. She looked at Lydia. And you. You are terminated. My lawyers will handle the rest. Lydia began to cry. Ugly, desperate tears. Leora, please. I was pressured. Sterling made me do it. I'm your best friend. Leora looked at her, and for the first time, she saw Lydia, not as a monster, but as a tragedy. A woman so consumed by envy, she had burned down her own house to warm her hands. I forgive you, Lydia, Leora said. The words shocked everyone, including herself. I forgive you because I refuse to carry the poison you tried to feed me. But you cannot stay here. You lost your seat at my table. Leora walked out of the boardroom. She didn't stay to watch the chaos. She didn't stay to gloat. She walked out of the building, into the bright midday sun. The air smelled sweet. Her headache was gone. 6 months later. Leora stood on the balcony of the finished Oakhaven estate. It was magnificent. The thorns were gone, replaced by blooming roses. The broken statues had been restored. It was more beautiful than her original vision. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely. She had lost people she thought she needed. She had lost her reputation for a season. She had almost lost her mind. But she had gained something that couldn't be bought. She had gained her authority. She understood now. The attacks, the solitude, the counterfeit, the Judas, the sickness, the conspiracy, they weren't signs that God had left her. They were the confirmation that she was a threat to the kingdom of darkness. You don't send an army to attack an empty castle. You only attack where the treasure is. Her phone buzzed. It was a new investor, a woman who shared her vision for kingdom business. Meeting is set for tomorrow. Can't wait. Leora smiled. She looked up at the sky. You warned me, she whispered, "and you kept me." She turned and walked back inside, the click of her heels echoing like a war drum. She was no longer just a business owner. She was a general, and she was ready for whatever came next. If this story resonated with your spirit, it's not a coincidence. You are being targeted because you are being promoted. The isolation, the betrayal, the pressure, it's all proof of your calling. Don't drop your crown in the fire. If you're ready to walk in your authority, hit that like button, subscribe, and type "I am chosen" in the comments below. Let's build this army together. I'll see you in the next video.